Welcome to today's webinar training titled Teaching IET CTE Course Content to ESOL and ABE Students, an IPDA training specifically tailored for adult education, IET, CTE, and AGE instructors. My name is Maria Gutierrez, and I will be your IPDA trainer for today. Now, teaching IET CTE course content to ESOL and ABE students can be challenging. This webinar will explore IET models and best practices to assist instructors in successfully teaching career-based competencies and skills to their ESOL and ABE students. So let's get started. Let's go over today's agenda. In part one, I will review all of the essentials for IET. In other words, I'll describe it to you in a nutshell. We'll look at the definition, goal, and benefits of IET. I'll also explain why contextualization and concurrent activity are key requirements for IET. In part two, we'll explore various IET models. There are 4 models. However, we will explore the 3 that are the most pertinent to adult educators in Florida. And we'll also look at a hybrid solution to these models. In part 3, we will dive into teaching. As we dive into teaching, we'll take a deeper look into the hybrid model and how this model could provide districts with the biggest bang for their buck. In part 4, we'll look at how ESOL and ABE students who participate in IETs can make measurable skills gains, or MSGs. So let's get started with part 1, IET in a nutshell. All right, we begin with the question, what is IET? IET is an innovative approach to adult education and workforce development that blends a range of education and training services to build learners' foundational employability and occupational skills. Here you have the actual definition of IET. It's defined as adult education and literacy activities, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training, each of sufficient intensity and quality, occurring simultaneously and using occupationally relevant instructional materials. The program is organized to function cooperatively with a single set of learning outcomes. Now, I know you've got this basic information down, but I wanted to quickly go over the basics just in case we have any newcomers to IET. Now, there's definitely a goal for IET. The goal of IETs is to improve the reading, writing, mathematics, and English proficiency of eligible individuals, as well as equip these individuals to attain basic skills and training in a specific occupation or industry. Now, what do you think are some of the benefits of IET? Well, actually, there are several. Some of these include the contextualized basic skills instruction, making simultaneous skills gains, the acceleration of outcomes, work-based learning opportunities and work experience, and a career pathway leading to family-sustaining wages. Now, why do you think contextualization and concurrent activity is important in IET? Well, IET utilizes contextualization and concurrent activity as acceleration strategies, just to help individuals reach their goals faster and more effectively. So what does it mean? Let me just explain in a little bit more detail. IET is a learning approach that combines basic education like reading, writing, math, or English language skills, right, with job-related training. It's designed to help students quickly and effectively achieve their career goals. Now, there are 2 main methods that are used in IET to speed up learning, and these are contextualization and concurrent activity. Let's start with contextualization. This is just a fancy way of saying that basic educational skills aren't taught separately. Instead, they're mixed into career-focused lessons. For example, if you're in an IET program for healthcare, you might learn math by calculating medicine dosages or measuring vital signs. By linking basic skills to real-world job situation, it helps you better remember and understand the information because you can see how it's directly useful in your chosen career. Let's move on to concurrent activity. This means that instead of learning basic skills first and then moving on to job training, IET programs let you learn both at the same time. It's like taking a shortcut on your educational journey because you don't have to complete one set of classes before starting another. Now, by using these methods, IET helps students gain important academic and work-related skills all at once, making the path to a successful career quicker and smoother. In simple terms, it prepares students for the job market by teaching them all the skills they'll need in a quick and practical way, tailored to the career that they're interested in. Now, integrated education and training is an innovative approach to adult education and workforce development that blends a range of education and training services to build learners' foundational employability and occupational skills. These IET programs are offered by institutions of higher education, nonprofit education, and training providers, or two or more organizations that are working together in partnership. The goal of IET is to improve the reading, writing, math, and English proficiency of eligible individuals, as well as equip these individuals with basic skills and training in a specific occupation or industry. Now, let's move on to part 2 of this webinar. Here, I will provide an overview of the different Florida IET models. Now, remember, IET is a comprehensive approach to education and training, combining adult ed and occupational skills training in a single program. Now, there are 4 IET models: fully integrated, partially integrated, the one instructor model, and the employer or community partners model. In this webinar, I'll be addressing the first 3: fully integrated, partially integrated, and one instructor. Let's start with the fully integrated instruction or co-teaching model. In this model, an adult education basic skills instructor is paired with an occupational instructor, or we refer to them as CTE instructors, in the same classroom to provide a cohesive presentation of both the basic skills and the occupational content. The instruction must be based on a single set of learning objectives and must occur simultaneously. Now, we've already done several webinar and face-to-face trainings on single sets of learning objectives, so I will not be diving into this topic today. If you are new to IET, however, I strongly urge you to check out the IBDE website and download previous IET trainings that focus on single sets of learning objectives, or SSLOs. Now, some of the key components of the fully integrated instruction or co-teaching model include the following: the adult general education or AGE instructor, which is ESOL or ABE instructor, must provide supplemental basic skills instruction within the workforce skills content. Technical course materials are integrated with adult education basic skills. There are workforce preparation activities, and the contents aligned through joint planning and or co-teaching, right? Now, I want you to remember one thing. One teacher must be certified in the specific occupational program area. So anytime I refer to the CTE instructor, this instructor must be certified in that occupational area. Let's look at this visual of the fully integrated model. In this model, an adult education teacher and other qualified individual provide specific skills training, both occurring at the same time. There are pros and cons to the model. Some of the pros include that it's less stressful for each instructor. There are more opportunities for targeting instruction. It leads to a smooth instructional delivery. It provides for constant clarification and reinforcement of ideas, and there's a higher level of energy and student engagement. There are some cons, though. There's a much higher cost of implementation because you have to pay for 2 instructors in the same classroom. There's more planning involved, and there's a higher coordination of class activities required. The second model is the partially integrated instruction model. In this model, the adult education teacher and other qualified individual, right, provide specific skills training that occurs at different times. And this allows for greater scheduling flexibility. Now, as with the other model, there are key components for the partially integrated instruction model. And some of these include that there's an AGE or adult education, general education instructor to provide specific supplemental basic skills instruction within the workforce skills content. The instructors work together to identify basic skills needed for adult education students to master the workforce skills covered, okay, but not occurring at the same time, and workforce preparation activities are provided. Now, let's look at this visual of the partially integrated model. Notice that in this model, an adult education teacher and other qualified individual provide the specific skills training that occurs at different times, right? Like the other model, there are pros and cons. Some of the pros include flexibility. Because the basic skills instruction and occupational training are separated, there is greater flexibility to tailor the program to students' individual needs and learning speeds. And this can be beneficial for students who may need more time to grasp certain basic skills. Another pro is expertise. The separation allows instructors to focus on their area of expertise. So basic skills instructors can focus on academic instruction, while the vocational or career technical instructors can focus on occupational skills. There's ease of implementation. This model might actually be easier to implement than the fully integrated models, as it doesn't require as much coordination between two different instructors or departments. Now, there are also some cons, the first one being lack of collaboration. With the basic skills and occupational training being conducted separately, there may be less opportunity for instructors to collaborate and learn from each other, which could limit the overall effectiveness of the program. There's also a lack of context. Even though basic skills and occupational training are linked with common themes, they're not taught concurrently in a single class. So as a result, students might not get the full benefit of contextualized instruction that can make learning more meaningful and effective. It is time consuming. The partial integration model can be more time consuming as students have to attend separate classes for basic skills and occupational training. Our third model is the one instructor model. Now, in this model, all three components, the adult education basic skills instruction, the workforce preparation activities, and the workforce training are provided by a single instructor who has expertise in both basic skills instruction and the occupational area. Key components of this one instructor model include that the one instructor provides basic skill instruction and workforce training, technical course materials with integrated adult education basic skills exist. You must provide workforce preparation activities, and the teacher has to be certified in the specific occupational program area. Now let's look at the visual of this one instructor model. In this model, adult education basic skills instruction, workforce preparation activities, and workforce training are provided by one instructor. This is a tricky one because in order to have one instructor, right, the instructor has to have experience in both that CTE area, the career area, and in IET or AGE. This is an extremely difficult model to implement because that one instructor is responsible for delivering both contents, right? As well as providing individualized literacy, language support. So it's a lot for just one person, and it will be extremely difficult for the instructor to show performance gains for both the CTE and the AGE components. But either way, we're going to take just a little closer look because in your district, this may be the option that your district decides to implement. Now, there are pros and cons. So some of the pros include that it is definitely less cost involved, right? And absolutely no common planning is required because there's only one teacher. On the opposite hand, some of the Cons include that it is definitely more stressful for the instructor because, again, one instructor is responsible for student performance gains in CTE as well as in AGE, which is ESOL or ABE. In this model, students are definitely less engaged, and it's really difficult for differentiating instruction. Now, before we move to part 3, let's review the 3 models and let's add a 4th, the hybrid model. Now, we begin with the fully integrated instruction or co-teaching model. Remember that in this model, you have the CTE and the AGE teacher teaching together in the same classroom at the same time. Let's move to the partially integrated model. Now you have the CTE and AGE teacher, right, teaching CTE and basic skills content at different times. The third model we looked at was the one instructor model, and here you only have a single instructor who is responsible for providing both CTE and basic skills instruction. And again, I have to reiterate that it's important for this instructor to have the qualifications and the experience to teach both sets of content. Now, I really want to look at model number 4 on this slide. This is not one of the 4 original models that I mentioned earlier in this training. It's actually a combination of both the fully integrated and the partially integrated models. In this model, you will see that students have 2 schedules. So part of the day, they're scheduled with a CTE and AGE teacher in the CTE classroom, where both teachers are focusing primarily on CTE content. The second part of the student schedule focuses primarily on AGE content. In other words, on ESOL or ABE standards. This part of the model, it's almost like a pull-out model where the AGE teacher focuses on this basic skills and language instruction. Now, in conclusion, the Florida IET models provide a comprehensive approach to education and training by combining adult education and occupational skills training in a single program. The 3 models, the fully integrated or co-teaching, the partially integrated, and the one instructor models, each offer different approaches to delivering IET, but all share the key components of integrating basic skills instruction with workforce training and providing workforce preparation activities. Now, remember, we are excluding the employer or community partner model, but we are adding the hybrid model, which I will soon address in greater detail. Now, as we move on, I want to emphasize that you must always think career pathways. You know, IET is the core educational strategy for career pathways that was developed between WIOA partners. But IET alone will not meet the requirements to promote educational and career advancement. The education component of IET must be aligned with the state's content standards, and the IET program must be part of a career pathway. So we've got to remember that this goes beyond classroom innovations. Career pathways must provide robust participant support services, including career counseling, navigation, placement, and retention services. IET does not and cannot exist in a vacuum. It must be connected to all of these things. All right, in part 3 of this training, we're going to dive into teaching. But first, we have to understand the content that is taught in the CTE class versus the content that is taught in an IET class, right? Let's begin by comparing the one instructor model with the hybrid model. And I'm only comparing these two because in reality, the hybrid model, which I already told you, is a combination of the other 2 models, the fully integrated and partially integrated ones. So in essence, we're kind of looking into all 3. Let's dig a little deeper. Here's a look at the IET models that are being commonly implemented in technical colleges and adult education centers throughout the state. We really only have to address two, the one instructor and the hybrid, because again, remember the hybrid is a combination of the partially integrated and the fully integrated models. Let's start with a one instructor IET model. In this model, there's only one instructor who is a CTE teacher with teaching experience in ESOL or ABE or even GED. This instructor is responsible for delivering the CTE content during the regularly scheduled CTE class time, right? But because the instructor has literacy teaching experience as well, he or she can integrate literacy instruction and apply literacy skills within the CTE lessons. This model, however, puts a lot of stress on the instructor because he or she has to ensure that the students actually master the CTE standards and benchmarks, and also has to ensure that the students move up one functional level in either ESOL or ABE or pass the GED test. Now, let's take a look at the hybrid model. To me, this model makes a lot more sense. Because there are two instructors, the roles as far as responsibility for content delivery is pretty much equally split. As part of the fully integrated model, the two instructors, meaning the CTE and the IET, are in the CTE classroom at the same time. The CTE teacher guides the CTE instruction while the IET instructor helps the IET students with understanding the content and completing activities by providing that necessary literacy support. Now, as part of the partially integrated model, the IET instructor also has a separate class time for the IET students where he can focus on either the CASAs or TABE or GED content. So the purpose for this separate instruction is to make sure that the instructor addresses any non-mastered content that the student will be assessed on when post-testing comes around. Remember, an IET student has to demonstrate mastery of the CTE standards and benchmarks, as well as demonstrate mastery of either ESOL or ABE or GED standards and competencies. During the CTE class, the instructional focus is on the CTE content. During the separate IET class, the focus is on remediation for the CASAs or the TABE or GED tests. Again, folks, it is critical to remember that CTE hours and IET hours must be recorded and reported separately, right? Why? Because they're reported separately to the state for funding purposes. Now, before we plunge into this teaching piece, right, let me just briefly address program scheduling with the hybrid model, because there are different ways to schedule IET into a CTE program. I just want you to be aware of several possibilities. What we're going to be focusing on, however, is going to be the delivery of instructional content during the scheduled CTE class versus the IET class. Okay, I know, sounds a little confusing, but it's going to clear up with this example. Now, when you look at this first example, right, at this school site, you see that the CTE course is offered 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. for a total of 25 CTE instructional hours per week. During class, the CTE teacher is providing CTE content instruction. At the same time, an IET teacher is present in the same classroom in order to provide literacy support. Now, it's important to note that the focus for instructional content is always CTE during CTE class time. The IET teacher is simply using IET strategies to help make the content and the activities digestible for low literacy students or students that need more language assistance. These low literacy students could be ABE or GED or ESOL students. Now, let's look at the second schedule, which is the IET component. This one is scheduled 4 days a week from Monday through Thursday, right? This class is run exclusively by the AGE or IET teacher. Now, during this time, the content that is delivered is either ESOL, AGE, or GED. Remember that IET students must show progress or measurable skills gains, right, in both CTE content and IET content. During this time, the IET students receive instruction or remediation on non-mastered competencies that are going to be tested on either the CASAs, the TABE, or the GED when they're ready to post-test. During this time, the IET teacher may also front-load vocabulary or specific CTE content provided by the CTE teacher. Now, this is usually done in preparation for an upcoming CTE class so that, the students are able to follow the class and better understand the content. But the IET teacher may also take some time during this period to remediate CTE content that the students didn't quite grasp during the CTE class. Let's look at another example. But before I start explaining, I just want to clarify that these are just examples of ways in which your administration or your registrar can set up the IET on their master schedule. There is no specific required number of IET course hours, right? This has been left up to the individual school district and school site principals, since every school has different student demographics that need to be addressed. Now let's go back to the example. At this school site, the CTE course is offered 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday from 5 to 9, right? For a total of 16 CTE instructional hours per week. Like the previous example, during class, the CTE teacher is providing CTE content instruction. At the same time, an IET teacher is present in the same classroom to provide that literacy or language support. And please note that the focus for instructional content, again, during a CTE class is CTE. The IET teacher is just using IET strategies to help make the content and the activities understandable for these low literacy or language, low language students, right? These low literacy students, they can be ABE students or GED or ESOL students. Now let's look at the second schedule, and this is the IET component. Here, it's scheduled twice a week on Mondays and Wednesdays. This class is run exclusively by the AGE or IET teacher. During this time, the content that's delivered is either ESOL, AGE, or GED. Remember, once again, IET students have to show progress in both the CTE content and the IET or AGE content. During this time, the IET students receive instruction or remediation on any non-mastered competencies that are going to be assessed on when they're ready to post-test. And this could be either CASAS, TABE, or GED test. During this time, this IET teacher may take a little bit of time to front-load vocabulary or specific CTE content at the request of the CTE teacher, right? Or they can also choose to provide CTE remediation on any content that was previously taught in the CTE class that the students are having difficulty understanding. Now, let me clarify one more time, because this question has come up so many times about the content in the CTE class versus the IET support class. And I want to call it the IET support class because the main focus is CTE instruction, right? So you have two classes in the CTE classroom, right? This is going to be a co-teaching type model. The CTE content is taught by the CTE teacher. Mastery of that CTE content is the responsibility of the CTE teacher. The IET teacher is there to support the IET students by using literacy skills to facilitate understanding, right? The IET teacher places emphasis on the CTE content, right? This is not the time to remediate students in preparation for the CASAs or the TABE or the GED. Now let's move to the IET support classroom. Here, the IET teacher is working solo. This teacher is focused on remediating any non-mastered content that the students will see when post-tested with either the CASAS or the TABE or the GED, okay? In essence, this IET teacher is prepping the students for post-testing. The IET teacher may also provide additional instruction or clarification on previously seen CTE content, right? So they could be front-loading CTE content in preparation for an upcoming lesson, or remediating content that the students didn't quite get from a previous CTE lesson. Let's look at this visual, okay? I love this visual because it's a great depiction of what the instructional day looks like for a student who's enrolled in a CTE and IET class, right? Using the hybrid model. So first of all, during the regularly scheduled CTE class, you can see that the IET student receives CTE instruction, right, from the CTE teacher, along with other CTE students. Now, should the student need assistance, clarification, for example, the literacy or IET teacher can step in and maybe repeat the instruction for the IET students using some literacy strategies, right? Just to help them better understand that content. Another option is for that IET student or IET teacher to pull the student aside just to provide further instruction or clarification. And then the IET teacher can also help the student implement certain strategies to help them complete an activity. Now, let's talk about the second portion, which is the IET or literacy class, and that's on the right. You see that says pull out. This is the class where the IET students are scheduled just to receive that, or mainly to receive that additional literacy or language support. These IET students could be ESOL, ABE, or GED students. This means that they either need language or literacy instruction, right, or support. Now, during this IET class, the IET teacher may take some time to prepare the students for an upcoming CTE lesson that requires intense vocabulary or maybe some, specific literacy activities tied to that lesson. But the main focus is for that IET teacher to remediate students on any content that hasn't been mastered with regards to their literacy post-test, which could be ESOL, ABE, or GED, right? You should handle this class in kind of like a boot camp format. So what that means is that the instruction really should only target anything that hasn't been mastered, right? You're not going to go over all of the ESOL competencies or all of the TABE skills or whatnot. Now, this training, again, is not focused on some items, like, for example, the individualized instructional student plans. We've done multiple trainings on IISPs, but this is exactly where the IISPs come into play, okay? If you haven't seen those webinar trainings on IISPs or individualized instructional student plans, you are strongly urged to visit the IPTE website and view them, because these trainings are dedicated to the implementation of these ISPs as a tool to target this non-mastered AGE content, right? These are these documents, these IISPs will allow the IET instructor to identify that non-mastered content just so they can focus instruction and remediation on these areas to ensure that your students will move from one functional level to the next and that they earn a measurable skills gain, right? Some of you may be familiar with the term literacy completion point. Well, it's just the old way of saying measurable skills gain, right? So when I say MSG, I'm referring to the old LCPs. Now, on this slide, let's address instruction in the CTE class and then the IET class, right? We're going to review this until you guys are comfortable with it. We begin with the CTE class, which is boxed in red. Let's dig into what instruction looks like or should look like in this class. But before I do so, I just want you to notice that the schedule's from 9 to 2, Monday through Friday, right? And it displays CTE course. You see that? Now, in order to address the instruction for our hybrid model, remember that the CTE class follows that fully integrated component, right? So to address the instruction where there are two instructors in the same room at the same time, we are going to explore 5 co-teaching models. Now, before looking at these, I have to define the word co-teaching, right? Co-teaching is defined as two teachers working together with groups of students, sharing the planning, the organization, the delivery, and the assessment of instruction, as well as the physical space. In a co-teaching setting, the teachers are considered equally responsible and accountable for the classroom. And remember, this hybrid model that we're looking at has two components. The first component, which is the focus for CTE, is this co-teaching model. Now, let's look at some defining characteristics of co-teaching. In a co-teaching situation, you have two or more professionally licensed teachers that are jointly delivering instruction to a diverse group of students in a shared classroom space. Back to the hybrid model, let's see what teacher is responsible for what content. In this hybrid model, the CTE teacher is responsible for the student mastering CTE content and gaining an MSG, or measurable skills gain, which can translate to what we call an occupational completion point, or OCP, leading to the completion of 360 hours of instruction, or leading to a certificate of value. Meanwhile, the IET teacher is responsible for the student mastering AGE content, that's ESOL or ABE or GED, right? And gaining an MSG, or a measurable skills gain, which can translate into what we just mentioned earlier as that LCP, or a GED completion. So the IET teacher is also responsible, again, for helping the student understand the CTE content, right, when necessary, and maybe even remediate some content that he or she may not have understood from a prior course. Now, as you guys work with each other towards the same instructional goals, it's going to become clear how best to approach each instructional lesson. On this slide, I want you to look at some questions that can be used to initiate conversations between co-teachers. These will provide guidance on content that you should discuss prior to embarking on a co-teaching experience. These questions will help you start off on the right foot, so to speak, okay? And I'm telling you this because without this conversation, without asking and answering these questions, you're not going to be embarking on a positive co-teaching experience. You're going to be embarking on a nightmare. So as I read through these, you're going to see the value of holding conversations that specifically address these questions. What do you see as your greatest strength as a teacher? What are your classroom expectations, along with maybe positive and negative consequences? What are your daily procedures and routines? How would you describe a typical lesson? How do you plan lessons? And how closely do you follow your lesson plans? How do you provide for varied student needs during a lesson? How do you describe the practice activities that you use? What noise levels do you permit in your room? How do you monitor and evaluate progress? How do you grade? How do you maintain records of grades in progress? What assistance do you allow students to receive during tests or quizzes, seat work, activities, etc.? What disciplinary action do you take without assistance from administrators? How will we find the time to plan for co-teaching? How will we share planning, preparing, teaching, evaluating, and reporting responsibilities? You know, what are some of your pet peeves in the classroom? How will we build trust and maintain confidentiality in our classroom? Now, it's also suggested that you sit with your co-teacher and you come up with additional questions of your own. You know, this list, however, should definitely be sufficient to at least get the conversation started. On this slide, I want you to focus on 5 co-teaching models that CTE and IET teachers can implement in the CTE classroom. Now, also, please keep in mind that you can choose more than one model to deliver instruction during the same class periods, because different models address different instructional situations. Let's begin with lead support. Here you have one teacher assuming the primary role for instruction, while the other teacher circulates the classroom, assisting individual students. It's important for both teachers to be viewed on equal status when presenting instruction. Next is team teaching. Here, both teachers contribute to instruction interchangeably. This model requires a comfortable, trusting co-teaching relationship as well as collaborative planning. Following, we have parallel teaching. Here, each teacher provides instruction to half of the class. This allows for more interaction with students and the ability to provide assistance to individual students when necessary. Groups can be determined by skill, assessments, etc. In the alternative teaching model, a small group of students is created for remediation or reteaching of a skill or concept, pre-teaching of a necessary skill identified by the teacher, assessments, and more. And finally, we have station teaching. This typically involves 3 to 5 stations, and what happens is that students rotate between stations every 20 to 25 minutes or so. Each teacher works at a particular station with each group of students as they visit that station. And this could be to provide new instruction, to provide remediation or reteaching of a skill or concept, or even as an enrichment session. The task stations without a teacher could be something that the students can complete without the aid of an instructor. So in these stations, they can work independently, in pairs, or even as a group. Now remember, you can choose more than one model to effectively deliver instruction during the same class period. Let's refer back to this slide for a minute. I want you to see that the bottom half is now boxed in red. We're going to dig a little deeper into what instruction looks like or should look like in that IET or AGE class. You know, I call it IET AGE because in essence, students who are enrolled in IET are AGE students. So this means that they're ESOL, ABE, or GD, right? Now, in order to address instruction for our hybrid model, remember that the IET class follows the partially integrated model, okay? And in this model, you have one instructor in the class, and that is the IET instructor. So what does the IET instructor cover in the IET class? Well, you can basically divide the content into 2 areas. AGE content includes the ESOL students who need to move to the next functional level, right? Or ABE students who need to move to the next functional level in reading or math, right? Or GED students who have a pending subject area test to pass. Let's begin with the type of AGE instruction that needs to be delivered. So for ESOL students, the IET teacher will need to prepare them to pass their CASAS post-test. In order to do this, they need to follow any non-mastered content that's identified on the student's Individualized Instructional Student Plan, or IISP. Again, folks, if you have not yet viewed any of the IPDAY trainings on IISPs, please take the time to do so. Use of these plans will ensure that your students progress in either ESOL or ABE. For the ABE students, the IET teacher will need to prepare them to pass their TABE 11-12 post-test, be that reading or math. In order to do this, they'll need to follow any non-mastered content that is identified on the student's IISP. And again, I'm not going to go into details regarding these plans because that's an entirely different training. So please take the time to view these trainings on your own time. And finally, for the GD students, the IET teacher will need to prepare them to pass any pending GD subject area tests. Now, let's get to the second type of instruction that's delivered during this IET scheduled class time, right? This refers to CTE content that is directly tied to the student's CTE course. It can be done in 2 ways. First, you can focus on front-loading content and preparing students for an upcoming CTE lesson, right? And this content could include vocabulary or procedures, or maybe even measurement calculations if they apply. Second, it can focus on remediating past CTE content that the student was exposed to in a prior lesson but was not able to grasp. Now, we are at the last part of our training, which addresses student performance. This section is critical, very short, but critical, because you need to maximize student performance in order to maximize funding opportunities. These are the 3 ways in which an IET student can make a measurable skills gain, right, or MSG. First of all, the first is by gaining an LCP, right, or an MSG, by moving from one functional level to the next. And again, remember, LCP, that literacy completion point, is the old word for MSG, measurable skills gain. In ESOL, for example, a student who moves via post-testing from an ESOL 4 to an ESOL 5 will gain that 1 MSG. If a student is in reading language arts in ABE, let's say level 2, and post-test at a level 3, then the student will gain 1 MSG for ABE. The second category, the student can gain an MSG by completing 360 hours of actual class attendance in that CTE class. In other words, when this person or this student reaches 360 hours of attendance in CTE, then he or she will gain 1 MSG. Now, again, it's important to note that there are IET programs that are less than 360 hours. If a student is enrolled in such a program, they will not gain an MSG for the 360-hour mark. Why? Because logically, the program doesn't last 360 hours. Now, some programs have a certificate of value attached to them. For those programs, the student will earn an MSG when he or she earns this certificate of value. And I just want to talk for a minute about an additional measurable skills gain. For those of you who are CTE teachers, basically, you know that any student registered in a CTE class will gain an MSG when they complete an occupational completion point, or an OCP. So the more OCPs the student completes, the more MSGs they will earn. What you need to understand is that OCPs cannot be reported as MSGs for IET participants, okay? They are separately reported as OCPs, but they're not reported under the IET umbrella. Folks, we have come to the end of today's webinar training, Teaching IET CTE course content to ESOL and ABE students. Please be sure to refer to the companion handbook for this training for additional information and resources. Thank you, and I so look forward to our next IB Day training. Have an amazing day.